Hey guys, today I have an updated viewer favorites for you. This is 22 of the projects that you guys loved and voted for throughout this year. So with that, let's jump right in. Friends, today I am taking inspiration from the scrap wood Dollar Tree started putting out, and I'm sharing 3 projects using the same type of wood but from Home Depot, giving you inspiration to use either option based on what you can find in your area. The wood I'm using from Home Depot is this common board 1x2 by 8 feet for $3.19 a piece. It is the exact same type of wood the Dollar Tree is selling, as you can see with them side by side. For this project, I'm making a geometric wood art piece. You can find these all over Pinterest right now, so I took inspiration from different ones that I liked and started drawing out the design. Alright, so I built this frame. It's about 28 inches long, 1 foot wide. And I just built it out of MDF boards that are this thickness 1x2, just like the wood that you can get from the Dollar Tree. So this is the 10-inch piece of wood that I got from Dollar Tree, cut down the Home Depot pieces that I got and made them all 10 inches, the exact same size. So that's what we're going to be working with, is only this size and then cutting it down. This is going to have a diamond type pattern, and the center of all of my boards will be cut at 90 degrees. You can cut this angle with a miter box or a saw, whichever you have. I decided to cut all of my angles before laying out the pattern. Whew. Cut down all of my wood. So I started out with these 10-inch pieces from the Dollar Tree. So right there, that's $16 if you wanted to get this from the Dollar Tree, or probably about $4 from Home Depot. And then I cut 45-degree angles on all of them because we're going to start putting them together. The only cuts needed for this project are straight cuts and 45-degree angles. And to build the pattern, I started laying out the wood pieces with the 45-degree angles together, forming a point, and lined up 4 sets, one in front of the other. I did lay a scrap piece down in the middle so my wood didn't just fall while I was laying out my pattern. With the 4 sets laid out facing down, I'm going to do the same thing facing up, and the bottoms will start overlapping, as this is where I'm going to make another straight cut. When I was happy with where the spacing in the middle is, I drew a line and cut these pieces down. Now you can start to see the pattern coming together. This is a symmetrical design, so both the top and bottom will be cut the same way. Once both sides are cut down, here's what it should look like. We aren't quite done yet though. Next, I took the frame and laid it down on top of the pattern this time. This way I can draw a line and know exactly where to cut so the shape fits perfectly inside my frame. I also numbered each piece so I knew where it belonged. This cut is going to be a 45-degree angle, so you should end up with 8 pieces that have a 45-degree angle and a straight cut, and then 8 pieces with 2 45-degree angles in opposite directions. This is what everything should look like all cut. I took a fine grit sandpaper to go over all of the cut edges and made sure they were nice and smooth. And now it's time to paint. I'm using fawn as the main color and creating an ombre using white and black. And the way these are painted is what will bring that design to life. So starting with fawn by itself, I painted what will be the second row from the bottom and then the third row from the top. The next section, I added some white to lighten the color, and then again added more white until it was a very pale beige, and again working my way around the pattern. Adding the black was very tricky. Instead of making the fawn color deeper, which is what I wanted, it turned out to be a charcoal-like color, and I ended up playing with this one a lot until I was somewhat happy with it. I do wish it was more of a deeper brown tone, but I couldn't figure out how to get that to work with the tone of the rest of this piece. For the background, my husband helped me cut a piece of plywood, and I painted the top half of it and then that center square white and then the bottom black, adding to the ombre vibe. All that's left to do is glue everything together, and for this I used my wood glue hot glue so it would dry quickly. What do you guys think of this? I absolutely love the way this turned out. I need a better vocabulary than to always saying I absolutely loved it. For this decor piece, I took inspiration from this vase or planter pot I saw at Target in the Studio McGee new line. I love the texture on it, and I knew I could easily recreate this using things I already have lying around. Now, I know this Dollar Tree planter is not the same shape, but I still think it works to get that overall look. To start out, I'm going to take this acrylic gesso. I've never used gesso before, but I see a lot of art channels do that, and I really liked it for adding a primer base to a project, and will definitely continue using this. The outside of my planter got 2 coats, and I gave the inside one really light coat about 1/3 of the way down. Next, I'm going to use this shelf liner, which has the exact same texture pattern that was on the Studio McGee vase. At first, I was going to wrap it around, but realized that didn't really work so well. So instead, I cut the liner into 2-inch strips. Then using Mod Podge, I started applying the strips. The shape of this vase causes them to overlap a little bit in order to cover the whole surface. In the last strip, I only added on the top half to cover that bare section. This can be the back that no one's going to see. Once the Mod Podge was dry, I wanted to wrap the top of the shelf liner inside of the pot. This wasn't working well at first, and what I realized I was doing was adding too much Mod Podge and not allowing time for it to get tacky and hold that strip down. Since the pieces folding over are so tiny, it really needed that tack to stay in place. After this layer is dry, I'm taking ivory paint and gave the vase 2 coats. To get that glossy look that the Studio McGee piece has, you could add polyacrylic or a spray sealer or even Mod Podge. I used a gloss Mod Podge, and that's it for this one. For this project, I'm taking a Dollar Tree mirror and removing the backer as well as the mirror so I can paint the frame. Before painting, I did give the surface a scuff sand so that the paint will stick better. And I gave it a coat of Heirloom White by Rust-Oleum, but for some reason the spray paint was not drying and just stayed tacky, so I ended up going in with Drop Cloth by Dixie Belle. Next, I found this paper-like reed stuff at Dollar Tree last summer, and I've never seen it since, which is unfortunate, but I know you can find this stuff at other craft stores. I cut down several strands to start adding loops around the frame of the mirror and used hot glue to attach it. I did one layer with the loops right next to each other, and then did a second layer of smaller loops overlapping in between the larger ones. Next, I'm taking these half wood beads. I got these from Amazon and will link them below for you. I know these are not Dollar Tree, but Dollar Tree is selling wood bead packs now, so you can use those and cut them in half or use them as is. When adding wood beads to a project, I like to leave a small space between each bead. That way, when you get to the end, if they don't fit perfectly, it is a lot harder to tell and less noticeable. Where if you glue them right up against each other, you will see an obvious space at the end. Next, I put the mirror back on, but had to glue it down with popsicle sticks because of the paper spline, but that's it for this one. It was super quick and easy. This modern stool I made over about a year ago, and I'll link the original videos in my description box for more upcycled stool ideas. I love the dark base on this stool, but wanted to give it more of a layered and chippy look, so I'm gonna take my moss green paint and add some areas of green. Very sporadic. I don't want anything to look uniform or even look good at this point. Once the green paint is dry, I sprayed the stool with a coat of this satin polyurethane. I'm going to add milk paint to get that chippy look and you want to have a slick surface. Now for the milk paint, I'm using the color Driftwood, which is a beautiful chocolatey brown, and I found this milk paint at a local woodworking shop called Woodcraft. A lot of creators use the Sweet Pickens milk paint, but I can't find that in my area. So if you're in a similar situation, try looking for a wood shop. But to mix milk paint, you want to take 1 part of the powder to 2/3 hot water. I like it a little bit thinner. They also say to use warm water, but I find hot water works better to dissolve the powder. You want to mix it up really well for 2 minutes and then let the paint sit for about 10 minutes to let that powder fully absorb. I put 2 coats of the milk paint on only the bottom part of the stool, nothing on the top just yet, and I used my heat gun to help accelerate the drying, which also helps get that chippy look. Since there were some areas of the paint that were really chipped, I took a scraper to get those loose areas off and started revealing the layers underneath. This is only my second time using milk paint, and I will say I think it turns out much nicer when you have multiple layers of paint with a few different colors. I love the way that this turned out. Once I got all the large chipped areas off, I took my sandpaper to smooth it out. And if you don't want the paint to continue chipping over time, seal it up now. I didn't seal it up because I want to see how this will continue to age. Now for the top of the stool, I got out my drop cloth fabric and wanted to stamp it. I love the idea of it having a romantic script look covering the fabric, and I got this stamp recently from IOD, which was perfect. I stamped it up with my black ink and then applied it to the fabric. I didn't add the full stamp because I wanted it to look like a continuous message across the whole top. I didn't want to use the very top or the bottom of the stamp. You can see there's some areas where there are a large gap between the words, so I did fill those in with some small words like the or of. If anyone were to actually read this, it would not make any sense, but I'm okay with that. This is more about the aesthetic. Once I was done stamping the fabric, I need to add it on top of the stool. This stool was originally just a flat wood on top, but I want there to be a cushion. And I have this 2-inch high density foam left over from another project, so I cut out a rectangle to fit on top. I did not glue it down to the wood, but I probably should have. To attach the fabric on top, I'm using my stapler and then tacked it down, and for the corners, I folded them to have a clean, straight tuck right on the edge. I was going to leave the stool like this, but thought it needed something more around the sides. I've been seeing fabric roses on my Pinterest feed and thought that would add to that overall romantic feel I was going for. Making the roses is super easy. You take a strip of fabric, you can ignore the stamps I had on this fabric, I was testing out some ink colors, but you want a roughly 2-inch wide section. I didn't measure anything here, and then tie a knot at the end. The longer your fabric strip is, the larger your rose will be. Then you just want to start twisting the fabric and wrap it around the knot, hot gluing it down as you go. These roses are so adorable. I made 30 of them to go around the stool and then hot glued them down around the bottom edge. That's it for this one. I love this version of the stool so much better. For this project, I'm taking these bud vases that I got from the Dollar Tree. I think these were out last spring, but I love the shape of them and painted both vases in a coat of gesso. Next, I'm taking my detail tip hot glue gun and going to start adding lines of hot glue all over the vase. I saw someone do this on social media. I can't remember if it was on Instagram or TikTok or where, but I thought it was genius for creating kind of an organic texture. I had no rhyme or reason to how I was applying the hot glue. I just made zigzags and didn't want it to look too symmetrical or like perfect lines. The detail tip glue gun is perfect for this project since you have a lot more control over how much is coming out and how thin the lines are. I did one of the vases with horizontal lines and the other with vertical lines for a bit of contrast. After I covered both vases in hot glue, I painted them with this nutmeg spray paint. Unfortunately, the spray paint did not stick to the surface very well. It looks like a mess, but it looks like it didn't stick to the gesso, which is interesting because gesso is meant to be a primer for paint to adhere to. Very strange. So I decided to take my Dixie Belle paint in the color Mud Puddle and used a chippy brush to get in all of the grooves between the glue. Once that paint was dry, I took the Dixie Belle white wax with a stencil brush to stipple it over top of the paint. Let me tell you, I love this white wax so much better than Waverly. Waverly is so sticky and it's not white. If you're looking for a good white wax, give this one a try. I did small sections and then wiped back the wax, leaving it in the grooves. I love the way these turned out, so unique and perfect for every day. I love learning new techniques and bringing you guys along, so for this project I'm going to be working with glass in a way I haven't done before. I found these 12 by 12 glass sheets at Hobby Lobby and thought the rib detail was such a modern look, but I need to cut the glass down to the size I want. This was super intimidating at first, but it's actually really easy to do. The tool I'm using to cut my glass is this pistol grip glass cutter, which has a tiny tungsten carbide wheel and the empty chamber where you put the glass cutting oil. I'm going to show you on a scrap piece of glass how this works and how easy it is. You place the wheel at the edge of your glass, push down but not too hard, let the cutter do the work, and glide across the surface. This is going to score the glass, and you want to hear that scratching sound. Then, to break the glass, you use these running pliers. They have a U shape which helps push on the glass, and this line which you line up with the score, and then gently squeeze the handles. You want to leave these rubber tips on them. I accidentally threw them away and had to go grab them out of the trash. Now it's time to cut the real piece. I was so nervous to do this since the glass was a lot thicker than my test piece, but there were two things I learned while doing this. One, I needed to cut the textured glass from the back or the smooth side. And two, you want to start at the top and pull the cutter towards you rather than roll it away from you. I don't think I said what I'm creating here. This is going to be a lantern, and I wanted to add just a small bit of detail to it. So I'm using the cotton and eucalyptus transfer, again from Dixie Belle. There was a piece that looked like it would fit a corner. That was perfect to take up one pane of glass and then slightly wrap around onto a second. The perfect amount of detail I was looking for. These transfers were a little difficult to get onto the glass. I really had to keep rubbing over and over on the same spots, and it was just staying on the backer, not releasing to the glass. I did put the transfer onto the smooth part of the glass. I knew the ridges would be way too difficult, and I wasn't confident in how that was going to turn out. After I finally got the transfer on, I can assemble the lantern. I used a combination of E6000 and Starbond super glue this time for the instant hold, since hot glue and glass are not friends. And for the corners, I added a dowel rod. My original plan was to add a little strap or something to the top, but after putting it together and seeing how large it is, I thought it needed a base. So looking around my craft room, I have another one of these nesting boxes from the Dollar Tree that was the perfect size. My lantern is not perfectly square, so the spacing around the sides is not even, but that's okay. I glued the glass onto the box with E6000, and that's it for this lantern. It is incredibly heavy, and I'm terrified it's going to break, but fingers crossed it holds up. I saw these beautiful clay beads on the Pure Salt website and knew I could recreate them for way less than $238. I decided to use air dry clay here, and I had a little bit left of my paper clay. I get this from Michael's. It's around $12, and depending on the size project you're making, you can usually make quite a few things. I haven't loved working with air dry clay in the past and prefer polymer clay, but I realized I needed to add water to the air dry clay while working with it. That helps to keep it from drying out too quickly and fill in any of the cracks that start to appear. To make the beads, I'm taking small quarter-size pieces and rolling them into a ball, adding water to the surface to smooth it out, and then smushing the circles down a bit to create a more stone-like shape. I wanted the beads to be very organic looking and not all identical, so there was no rhyme or reason to how I shaped them. I ran out of my paper clay and only had about half of the beads that I wanted, but before I go get more clay, I need to put a hole into the center for where we're going to string them up. I'm using this clay tool, but anything would work here to just add a hole. I wanted to compare another brand of air dry clay, so I picked up this pack of Das to finish the beads. I really like the feel of this one over the paper clay, and the color is much whiter. I know my paper clay was a little bit older and dried out by the time I got to the end of the package, but taking that out of the equation, both clays dried in the same amount of time, they both shrunk slightly, and since I added the water in this time, I didn't notice any cracks form as it dried, which was great. That was really why I didn't enjoy working with air dry clay in the past. You also get a lot more clay for your money with the Das. They both cost $11.99, and the paper clay you get 16 ounces, where the Das comes in 35 ounces, so more than double the amount of clay. After I had all the beads made, I made 32 of them. I'm taking some different objects I have around my craft room to add some detail to the edges. Not on all the beads, but on some of them, since the inspiration had some edge details. So I used this metal ribbon from Dollar Tree to give a beveled look, and then this texture mold that I have to get some variety, and then let the beads dry overnight. Now we can paint, and I wanted to get that natural earthy look just like the inspiration with the various brown tones. I did not end up using the antique wax or the DIY dark wax. And I'm using a sponge to apply the paint so I can blend some of the colors together easier. I split the beads out into 4 groups of 8 and gave them 1 coat of paint using 4 of the colors: coffee, sandstone, hazelnut, and fawn. Then I took each group and added a 2nd coat of paint, and this time I added in some of the other colors to give the stones dimension and look more earthy. I just played around with the colors until I was happy with the way they were looking. The holes I added were not quite thick enough for my string to fit through, so I took my drill and made them slightly bigger before I could string them up. And I used Dollar Tree black cotton twine and put the beads on randomly so there wasn't a specific pattern. Last, I added a tassel using this leather string, and that's it for this one. I love the way these turned out, and for so much less than $238. Using my miter box to also show you that you do not need fancy tools or saws to cut this wood, a miter box will work just fine. I cut down 3 pieces to 10 inches, which is the size piece of scrap wood I bought from the Dollar Tree to compare. And I'm making a plant stand for this beautiful cyclamen that my boss got for my birthday last month. I'm really trying hard to keep it alive. So I'm holding the pieces up around the plant to gauge how far apart I need them to sit. Next, I measured and cut 3 more pieces at 6 inches long. Since I'm making this plant stand with 3 legs instead of the typical 4, I will also need to cut an angle on these base pieces. And I did use my miter saw in the garage to cut a 30-degree angle, and that's the only cut for all of the projects today where I needed the big saw. Now I'm placing the angled pieces together to create a triangle for the base where my plant is going to sit. Using this super glue wood glue you can find at the Dollar Tree, I glued them together. I really love this glue and I let the base dry for about 10 minutes. The glue works pretty quickly, then glued each of the legs about 3 inches down from the top. I also used my handy little level here to make sure the base was flat for my plant, and for extra security added a brad nail. With the legs on, I put some tape on the bottom just to make sure gravity didn't work against me here while the glue completely dried. Once everything dried, I stained the wood first with Early American because I have this stain in other areas of my living room where this plant stand is going to live, but I decided I didn't love it and ended up going with espresso instead. And that was it for this one. I absolutely love the way it turned out. For this project, I had bought this mirror thrifting and made it over once, which you will see in a video that's coming out in a few weeks, but I didn't end up liking how it turned out. So I'm just taking the frame and gonna create something different. Again, I'm using burlap by Dixie Belle and painted over the frame. After the burlap paint was dry, I'm spraying it with a clear sealer. I want to add a second color and then distress it back so that the burlap shows through. For the second color, I'm using Black Velvet by DIY Paint. This is slightly less deep of a black and I really love the way that it looks. Once the black paint was dry, I'm taking a baby wipe to wet distress it. This is why you want to add the sealer between the two colors, otherwise you would remove both paints. Now I'm taking the cardboard backer to the frame and covering it with canvas drop cloth. And for the art in this frame, I got this idea from Pinterest. I'm going to make a tree and I want it to feel very organic and three-dimensional and from nature, like it's a living piece of art. The trunk of the tree is made with rope. You can find nautical rope at the Dollar Tree, and I unraveled the bottoms of the rope to be the base of my tree. Since I want this to be three-dimensional, I also want parts of the tree to pop out off of the frame. So I hot glued the rope down and then spread out the tops of the rope to look like branches. Now for the greenery of the tree, I'm using 2 different colors of moss. I got these from Hobby Lobby. You could use Dollar Tree if you wanted. However, I think this moss was a little bit better only because it was already clumped together, making it much easier to work with and less messy. Once I had all of the moss laid down, I took some masking tape to clean up any of the little bits of moss that were loose. Then to make sure it all stays in place, I sprayed it with a clear matte sealer. That's it for this one. I think it is so fun and different, but let me know what you think. Found this little jug at a flea market for $1 and loved the shape of it, but not so much the pink color. To get a blank slate, I added a coat of gesso, and I'm going to try and redeem myself from last week's DIY fail and try the Modern Masters patina paint again. This time I'm using the copper. After watching some videos the company put out, I realized what I was doing wrong, and I'm going to start the same way with the 2 coats of the primer, waiting 30 minutes in between. Next, I added 1 coat of the copper paint. You have to shake this paint up really well because there are bits of metal in it which creates the patina, and let that dry for 30 minutes. Now, when you put the second coat on, you want to spray the patina. After I watched a few of the videos from the company, they said if you allow there to be areas of thick paint instead of making it super even, it will create a really cool effect. So I put the second coat on kind of messy and did it in sections, spraying the patina right away. I don't think I was adding enough wet paint the last time that I tried this. Here's how it's looking after 5 minutes, and I can already see the patina coming through this time. The directions tell you to spray another layer of patina after the 5 minutes. And here's what it's looking like a little while later. I didn't love how you could see the drips on one area, and there were other areas I thought the patina was a little too heavy. So I took a sponge with the copper paint and dabbed it over the areas I didn't like, then layered on more patina spray where I thought it was missing. And I love the way this one turned out. So next I have to retry the iron rust finish. What do you guys think about this one? I have been seeing these hanging planters all over my Pinterest feed for the last few months and finally decided I need to make one. So I'm taking one of these nesting boxes from the Dollar Tree along with two medium-sized wreath rings that I got from Walmart. I have seen these at Dollar Tree, but not recently. I do have a whole Christmas video using the Dollar Tree ones for even more ideas. To attach the rings to the box, I'm grabbing my bronze eye pins from this variety pack. I will need 4 of these as well as 4 bronze jump rings. I got both of these from Amazon and will link them in my description box. Next, I found where I wanted the rings to sit on the sides of the box and marked where the screw would go and then added the eye pins. It was a little difficult to get them started. I ended up taking a small nail and hammered it so the screw would have kind of a pilot hole. And then you want to make sure the hook part is facing horizontal rather than vertical. Once both eye pins were screwed in on one side, I added the jump rings into the hook and then attached the wreath ring before closing up the jump rings. And then repeated this process of adding the eye pins, jump rings, and wreath ring to the other side of the box. Now, the wreath rings will not automatically lean into each other, so to get that look, I'm using 2mm macrame cord. You could use jute twine, yarn, whatever you have, but I glued the starting end of the cord to the ring using my Starbond super glue. I would not recommend using hot glue here if you want the project to hold up over time. Then I wrapped the center of the rings together as long as I wanted it to be, and then glued the end back down. You could stop here, add a hanger, and be done. I wanted to add a little bit more detail to the top, so I took this wood ring, also from Amazon. All of my Amazon products will be linked below for you, but to attach it, I glued it down first to hold it in place, and then I wrapped more macrame cord around it a few times. I think my camera died for that part though. I also added a few wood beads in various sizes to another cord that would be the hanger. And to finish it off, I'm adding a loop and a wrap. So to make the wrap, create a loop as long as you want it for the very top where you will put it on a hook. Then take a separate cord and place it on top of the loop, making sure the end is sticking up, and then create a second loop going the opposite direction with the loose cord and make it longer than you want your wrap section to be. Now wrap all of the cords together. When you have it as long as you want, take the end of the wrapping cord and put it through the bottom loop. Then go back to the top loop, pull that cord tight. This will create a knot and conceal the knot inside of the wrap for a nice clean look. Now cut off the loose ends and that's it. Stick a plant in the box, hang it up and enjoy. I created this little plant nook when I made my living room built-ins and I love the way it's coming together. Let me know what you think about this project. Today I have a few projects using basket weaving reed that are easy to recreate, and here's the materials you will need for the first one. The reed, of course, which is linked in my description box. I got that from Amazon. Wood glue, I'm using wood glue super glue from Dollar Tree, and then binder clips. We're making a tobacco basket here, which I'm so excited about. I've been wanting to make my own for quite a while now. Before we get started, you want to find a box or something that's the size and shape you want your basket to be. I'm using a 12 by 12 cube storage bin for mine, which made my basket about 14 by 14 inches. So I start out wrapping the reed around the top of the cube, and I wrapped it 2 times. For the second layer, I added wood glue and the binder clips as clamps to hold the reed in shape while it dries. This process does take some time because you need to wait for the glue to harden between each step before moving on. Once I got back to where the reed started, I cut it off just using scissors. This stuff cuts really easy. Then I set this aside to dry for about an hour. Next, I'm going to create the cross section you see in the middle of the tobacco baskets. Usually they look like a diamond pattern. Now, I should have done this a little bit different, and I'll explain that, but I cut 4 strips to the length I wanted that section to be. Then when I went to attach them, this is what I should have done different. I was forcing the end of the reed to sit flat with the edge of the basket, which caused the reed to twist a little bit. I should have let the reed lay flat and then cut an angle on the end of it. I hope that makes sense. Here's an image I found on Pinterest that shows what I mean. But I got all 4 pieces on and then glued the cross sections together and set this aside for another hour to dry. Now I can add the woven section. For this, I glued the end of the reed to the top of the basket and then cut where it was needed. I didn't want to cut all the pieces at once, and some end up being too long or too short. This way there was no waste and each piece fit perfectly. I did 5 strips going each direction, and when I got to the weave portion, I did cut down the first piece, but for the rest, I wove it through the existing pieces, glued down the end, and then cut the opposite end. I think that's the better way to do this, but you certainly could cut the strips down if you want to work with a smaller piece. You also want to make sure to alternate the pieces, so if the first one's starting going over, the next should start under. And don't weave the reed through the diamond section we created first. I let this section dry for another hour and then cut off any of the pieces that were sticking up higher than the rim of the basket. I started with my scissors, but I did go back in with my box cutter, which made it look much cleaner. Now, to clean up the edges where all the strips are glued down, I wrapped the side with another layer of the reed. And then I tacked the center diamond section down to the woven part of the basket because that was starting to stick up a little bit. Next, I sanded down the edges since there's a lot of little frayed bits and was debating staining the basket or leaving it as is. Most tobacco baskets I've seen are a darker wood, so I did end up staining it with my Valspar antiquing glaze. You can find this at Lowe's, and I used a paintbrush and watered it down so it wasn't too dark and got into all those cracks a little easier. That's it for this basket. It is not perfect. I don't love the center design on this one, but it looks pretty good for my first ever basket. For this plant hanger, I'm using the 4mm macrame cord. Again, I got this from Amazon, and all of my materials will be linked below. This spool has lasted me a year, and I can still get maybe 1 or 2 more projects out of it, so definitely a really great deal. You're going to need 6 cords at 90 inches and then 1 cord at 30 inches. I'm using these wood rings for the hanger. These are also from Amazon, and take 2 of the 90-inch cords, fold them in half, and use them to create a lark's head knot onto the wood ring. To do this, put the center of the cords where they're folded through the ring, then pull the rest of the cord through the loop, and repeat that 2 more times so you have 3 lark's head knots. Next, I taped the ring down so it doesn't move around on me, and I'm going to make a cobra knot. I moved all of the other cords out of the way except the section I'm working on. To make a cobra knot, you'll have 2 working cords and 2 stationary cords in the center. Using the far left cord, make a 4 over top of the center cords, then bring the far right cord on top of the straight section of the 4. Bring the end of the right cord behind the 2 center cords and up through the center of the 4. Now I want the knot portion to sit about 4 inches down from the wood ring, so I only pull it tight to where I wanted it. I'm going to repeat this knot 8 more times and then do the same thing on the other 2 sections until I have 3 cobra knots. Now I'm going to move down a little bit and make square knots, starting about 8 inches down from the end of my cobra knot. To make a square knot, you start the same way as the cobra knot, making the 4 and pulling your cord through the center. Then repeat this going backwards. So make a backwards 4, starting with your far right cord. Bring the left cord over top and pull the end behind the center cords and through the backwards 4. I repeated this process, making 4 square knots. Now I'm going to finish the hanger with a wrap the same way as the first plant hanger and started it about 3 inches down from the end of the square knot section. I did not brush out the cords on this one, but you certainly could if you wanted to. Lastly, I'm taking this cork trivet from IKEA. They come in a pack of 3 and placing it into the center of the cords. This is going to act as a shelf for my plant to sit on, and that's it for this one. You guys, look at how big these blocks are compared to the Dollar Tree ones. Like the Dollar Tree ones just look so teeny tiny. There is the size of 1 block compared to a Dollar Tree Jenga block. Like, how crazy. Each box is $12, certainly more than the Dollar Tree ones, but you can make some really nice size projects. My 11-year-old picked out this first project and really wanted me to make a mini plant ladder. I was going to make it out of scrap wood, but thought it would be perfect using these blocks. I started out gluing 4 blocks end to end using regular wood glue. This is going to be the smaller top shelf. Now, I wanted my shelves to have a staggered look with the blocks, which required me to cut several blocks in half, but you could certainly make straight stacked rows if you don't have a saw to cut the blocks. And this shelf is 4 blocks wide by 4 blocks long, and the second shelf is 4 blocks wide by 4.5 blocks long. Next, I made 4 5-block pieces. I figured you don't want to keep watching me glue blocks together, so here's where we are so far. Now I need to attach 2 of the 5-block pieces to make an open bottom triangle. I don't know what you would call that shape, but this part almost caused me to give up on this project. I had to figure out most of it off camera because I was getting so frustrated. I cut the angle way too long and deep, so the side wasn't as wide as I wanted it to be. So I cut that top block off, glued a new one on, and cut a smaller angle. And that worked great for the first side. But when I tried to replicate it for the second side, I couldn't get the pieces to line up. There was a large gap between the 2 pieces where I couldn't get glue on enough of the surface, so I had to add a shim to the second side. Once the glue was dried, I cut the tips flat, that way the top of the ladder can sit on it. Okay guys, I have all of my pieces ready to go to build this plant ladder. So we have our little like triangular pieces. These are going to be the sides, and then we're going to put our shelves in between here. And then this is the top of our plant ladder. So this is a 2x4 block. I changed this to be staggered like the shelves and only 3 blocks wide, but 2.5 long. And then we have our 2 shelves. So one is slightly longer than the other. And then we have our rungs for the shelves to sit on. So I have 4 of these 2 block pieces, 1x2, I guess we'll call them. All right, now we can put everything together and build this piece. I next needed to figure out where the shelves are going to go on the ladder. I don't want to attach the sides directly to the shelves, so that's why I have the rungs. But they're a little too tall, so I cut them down to the height that I wanted, and then drilled a pilot hole through the side and down into the rung so the screw doesn't split the wood and attach them together. Getting the second side on was a little bit tricky. My craft table is not level, and I always forget that when building projects like this. So the shelf ended up being level lengthwise, but has a slight decline from the front to the back. Then I did the same thing for the top shelf. I'm not sure why I didn't show it. I must have forgot to hit record, but I just used wood glue and attached the top piece. And last, I stained it up with special walnut, and that's it for this one. I love how you can make some larger scale projects with these blocks. I ended up using 61 blocks, just under the 63 that came in a box. I'm taking my Craft Smart polymer clay and rolled it out and then cut out a bunch of squares using a cutter. Next, I took each of the squares and held it so one of the corners is facing up, more like a diamond, and then I rolled in the 2 sides onto each other, but then folded the corners back out to make a petal shape. I wanted the petals to look organic and not like they were all identical, so I pinched the back and kind of bent it in different directions. The Anthropologie version has more pointed looking petals, so I also gently pulled on the top to elongate them. Once I had a few petals made, I started adding them to a vase. And since the bottom of the petals is rolled in and comes to a point, I used that part to mold it to the vase. I also used this liquid Sculpey, which acts as a glue, and added a dab under each petal so it stays in place once it's baked. I rolled up the rest of my petals and added them to the vase, trying to closely mimic the shape of the Anthropologie version. And once I had all of the petals attached, I put the vase into the oven at 275 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 minutes. Then turned the oven off and let the glass cool down inside. I made 2 vases and spray painted them, which apparently I didn't hit record for, but I used heirloom white on one and khaki on the other, both by Rust-Oleum, and that was it for these. I love the way they turned out, and I only had to spend money on one of the spray paints, but if you had to buy everything, this would cost about $28 for both compared to Anthropologie at $9. Okay, this is the one I've been seeing all over the internet and of course in farmhouse style, but we aren't going that direction on this channel. To start, you want to remove the bottom of the tin can. I have a can opener that doesn't leave sharp edges, but if you don't have one like this, make sure you file the metal down so you don't cut yourself. It is very sharp. If you want to add a hanger, I would suggest adding in the holes at this stage before closing up the bottom because we're making a floral pocket. I used my crocodile to add a hole on each side. Next, I need to close up the bottom and started squeezing the can at the bottom together. I thought this was going to be a little more difficult, but it really wasn't too bad. If you have a vise, you could use that to easily crush the bottom in. I didn't find this to flatten the can any more than I had with my hands, but a hammer would work as well. I also squeezed the top in slightly to create a more oval shape, and then I painted the can in sandcastle. Next, I took this silkscreen stencil and applied it to the top and bottoms where the can is flat to give a more bohemian style to this floral pocket. I also took the white paint over the ridges of the can. I wanted this section to look a little more worn, so I added sandcastle back over top on the high points. Now I can add the hanger using 4mm macrame cord and decorate with florals. I love this take on the floral pocket, but let me know what you think. Next up, I think this is my favorite from today. I'm taking this same polymer clay and rolling it out into a thin strand. I'm going to start shaping the clay into a face. I love those line art faces I've seen on vases and artwork and thought this would be perfect for adding to the tin can. However, getting the face onto the can was a little bit difficult. I think because I was using one of the small cans, so there wasn't much room to work with. It just took me some patience, but eventually I got it. Once I got the face on, I'm taking this liquid Sculpey, which is liquid clay that acts like a glue. This will bond my clay pieces to the tin can while it bakes in the oven. You could also bake the pieces and then glue them on afterwards. Next, I'm taking this stone spray paint in bleached stone and sprayed it over the entire can. This stuff works best if you pulse spray it rather than hold down the nozzle for a continuous spray, and that's it for this one. You guys, I have so much scrap wood laying around in my garage, not even scraps, full boards of wood. These are all scraps. Up in the rafters, that's all mostly full boards, some scraps left over from other home projects. A full garbage can full of scraps. This is all scraps mostly, I think. Don't judge the mess of my garage. And another garbage bin full of wood scraps. So today we need to start working through this giant pile and get rid of some of it. So let's make some projects. For this project, I'm using a scrap 1x6 and 2x12 to make a book stack. I know this is not a new idea, but I haven't made one yet, and these turned out so beautiful. I found a book in my house that was a similar width to my 6-inch board and cut 2 pieces of wood that would be the same length. And then I cut one book out of the 2x12 to have some variation in the book sizes. Now, most book stacks you see have a phrase on them, but that is not my style. So instead, I'm using my silicone molds and air dry clay. This mold is Regal Trimmings from Redesigned by Prima, and I got it from Amazon, so I will link that below for you. But you always want to coat the mold with cornstarch so the clay doesn't stick. And then I glued it to the wood edge using my wood glue super glue. I thought that since this was also a super glue, it would work well, and it definitely did. I let the clay dry overnight and then painted the wood and the clay with plaster by Waverly. You guys, the power is out again at my house. This is the 3rd time in 2 weeks that my power has gone out, and it has been out for hours. It is currently 4:20. It's been out since about 1:30. So it's been out for 3 hours. Supposed to come back on between 5 and 6. I can't wait any longer. I did do some errands and left the house for a little bit, but I need to get these projects done. So I'm in my living room. At least there's like a couple of big windows in here. So we are set up shop in here. I'm gonna try to keep working, and if the light is a little wonky, that's why. Next, I wanted to add a gold leaf to the clay pieces. I'm using this metal leaf adhesive and gold flakes, also from Amazon and linked in my description box. The way this stuff works is you need to add the glue only where you want the gold leaf to be. I use a detail paintbrush to do this because I didn't want the entire area covered. And then you have to wait for the glue to become tacky. The gold leaf is not going to stick to wet glue. And this takes about 30 minutes or so. Once the glue is tacky, you can add the gold leaf. It's a little hard to see where the glue is once it's dry, but when you hold it towards the light, you can see that it's shiny. Once you have the gold leaf laid down, it looks a little bit messy, so you want to take a paintbrush to get the excess gold leaf off. I know this is not the best angle, a stupid power outage. One thing I've never seen anyone do with these book stacks is make the edges look like pages. I could be wrong there, I just haven't seen anyone do it. So I got out my flexible roller and a fine liner pen to draw lines around the 3 edges of the wood to look even more like books. This was tedious and not necessary, but to me, it's details like this that take a DIY project and make it look high-end and store-bought. After all the lines were added, I took a burlap by Dixie Belle and a chip brush over the edges to make them look a little more used and worn, and that's it for this one. For this project, I'm taking a roll of shipping paper, which came from the Dollar Tree, and I'm ripping a section off. And I'm going to use the paper to cover this vase that I also found at the Dollar Tree and loved the ridges on it. I measured how long I wanted the paper against the height of the vase, but do end up making them shorter. And again, I'm ripping the paper down instead of cutting it, and you'll see why here in just a minute. Once I have all of my paper ripped up, I'm taking a bowl and adding school glue and water. So now we can cover the vase with the paper. I dip each strip of paper into the glue water mixture and then use my fingers to get any excess glue off of the paper. I want this vase to look like paper mache, and I saw a similar one from a high-end retailer online. This is why you want to rip the paper instead of cut it. When you rip, the fibers of the paper are exposed and will blend together a little more seamlessly compared to when you cut with scissors and get those harsh edges that will just show up on your project. I made a paper mache dough bowl a few months back where I didn't rip the paper, I cut it, and I definitely wish I would have ripped it. Because of the ridges on this vase, I really had to mold the paper over each line and press it down while smoothing it out to make sure there were no air bubbles trapped underneath. Like I mentioned, I did end up making the strips a little shorter because it was too difficult to shape the paper around the neck of the vase. So after covering the bottom of the vase, I took smaller pieces to add around the neck and then curled them inside of the opening. And I set the vase aside to dry overnight. Once the paper was dry, I'm taking sandpaper along the inside rim to remove any excess paper, and by sanding in one motion going inside of the vase, the paper easily peels off perfectly all around the lip. I really wanted to keep that brown paper look, but to make it a little more high-end, I'm taking a white paint to dry brush over the whole thing. I added a heavy dry brush line over each ridge on the vase, and then with the remaining paint on my brush, went in between, but made sure to still leave that brown showing through. And that's it for this one. It was super easy to create and would only cost $3 if you had to buy all of these supplies. Small side table at the Goodwill bins for $2.99 at least a year ago and didn't know what I was going to do with it. Well, I finally figured it out, and I'm going to turn this into a porch planter box. I only need the legs from this table, and this thing was completely falling apart anyways. Once I got the spindle legs off the table, I sanded them down and painted them with drop cloth by Dixie Belle. I wanted to fill in all of the holes on the legs, so I grabbed a dowel that fits snugly in the hole, added some wood glue, and pushed the dowel in. And then I took this flexible dovetail saw to cut the dowel off right at the base. I did have to touch up a few spots of paint from the saw, but repeated this on all of the legs. Next, I've had this cabinet drawer in my stash for a while. It was in a kitchenette in my basement that my husband and I ripped out, but I held on to a few drawers and cabinet doors for projects. This is going to be the base of my planter, and I removed the drawer face. I actually got this idea from Pinterest. I love recreating things I find on Pinterest. That's definitely my #1 source of inspiration for video ideas. I'm going for a modern look with this project, so I'm taking some more of this pole wrap to cover the sides. In last week's video, I forgot to mention I got this pole wrap from Home Depot. I had some questions about that, so I will link it below for you. But I want the front of the drawer to be the long side rather than the short side, which is why I had removed that original face. This stuff is very easy to cut by hand. To cut lengthwise between the slats, you can use a utility knife, and to cut the width, you can use a miter box. To attach the pole wrap, I used a combination of E6000 and hot glue for that instant hold. Just don't mix these glues when you do something like this, or you will break down the E6000 bond, which will definitely not hold up over time. Now I need to add the spindle legs to the drawer. I used my drill to add a pilot hole into the drawer and then down through the legs so the wood doesn't split. And then I used these wood screws to attach the legs. Here's how it's looking so far. The front is blank because now I need to add that on. I have this cabinet door that was also in my basement, and I want to cut it down, but I want to keep this ridge detail around the edges. So to get the cleanest cut, I'm going to use my table saw. I measured the area up to where I wanted the cut and set my saw guide. I did have to reset this a few times to make sure I cut exactly where I had wanted, and then I painted the cabinet in the same drop cloth color. Before I add the cabinet drawer, I want to give it some design, so I'm using this magnolia transfer from Dixie Belle and cut out the large magnolia flowers and leaves from one of the sheets and figured out the placement for them. This is my first time using transfers in a large-scale project. I wanted the leaves to look like they were coming from behind the flowers, so I tried a few different methods to get that look. I honestly don't know which method I prefer. If you have any tips for getting a layered look, please let me know in the comments. Help a girl out. But I first tried cutting the leaves down to line up with the flower. That didn't work perfectly, so I tried layering the leaf down first and then placing the flower on top. But you could see the leaf under since it was a lot darker. I ended up going over the edges with sandpaper very lightly because I don't want this to look distressed. I just wanted the two transfers to blend together. I was only going to put the large pieces on, but I thought it was looking a little too plain, so I grabbed some of the branches and smaller flowers to add on as well, and I am obsessed with how this box is coming together. It is so stunning. Once all the transfers are on, I'm taking Dixie Belle clear coat to seal it. This clear coat is quickly becoming one of my all-time favorites. It dries so fast, so smooth, and I'm really enjoying it. If only it weren't so expensive, I would be using this on everything. Now I can attach the cabinet to the drawer using tight bond wood glue. I did stack some wood on top while the glue dried. I want to put a handle on the drawer so it looks even more like a dresser drawer planter, and found this one at Hobby Lobby. It fits the vibe of this project so perfectly. It was originally $9.99, but I did get it on half off day for about $4.50. Next, I added these large decorative tacks to the four corners. The color is antique brass, which matches the handle so well. So I thought I was done, but decided it needed a shelf. The legs looked a little long for my liking, so I ended up taking the legs back off so I could add a dowel. Since I had already filled in the original holes, I didn't want to drill them back out, so I drilled a new hole a little bit higher up and then glued the dowel into the hole and painted it. Then for the shelf, I glued a piece of the pole wrap to a thin piece of plywood. I did not secure the shelf to the dowel, so it is removable, but I'm so glad I added this last little detail. I just have 2 plants set in here for staging because I am giving this project to my mom. That way she can plant whatever she wants in it. Next up, we're making some wall art. I finally found the blank long wood plaques at Dollar Tree in both the larger and smaller sizes. So for this project, I'm using 3 of the large ones and 6 of the small ones. First, I filled in all the holes with lightweight spackle and then painted the boards white. Then I cut out a Monstera leaf on my Cricut with Oracle vinyl. I want to do a reverse stencil, so I weeded out the leaf and placed it onto the boards. Each stencil is going to cover 3 boards, and I cut between the boards with my X-Acto knife to separate them. Next, I'm taking a new color by Waverly, Sage, or at least it's new to my store, and I am obsessed with it. I gave each of the boards 3 thin coats of paint. I created 2 smaller art pieces with the smaller boards, but I used Dollar Tree vinyl on these ones. I haven't used the Dollar Tree vinyl yet and wanted to give it a try. I was really nervous because I've heard mixed reviews and didn't want to ruin my projects, but let me tell you, I was incredibly impressed. I might even dare to say it was better than the Oracle for doing a reverse stencil. Since I had to add multiple layers of paint, I couldn't remove the vinyl while the paint was wet. With the Oracle vinyl, I ended up having to take my X-Acto knife around all of the edges before peeling the vinyl off, which was extremely tedious. Where with the Dollar Tree vinyl, it came off so easily and looked so clean. Next, I wanted to add a frame so these would look a little more elevated. I still have plenty of pole wrap laying around, and this matched my bathroom perfectly. I don't know why I didn't record it, but I cut the pole wrap down with my miter shears and glued them down around the edges. Last, I just added a sawtooth hanger to the back, and this one's complete. Have you tried the Dollar Tree vinyl yet? Let me know what you think about it. For this project, I'm taking 2 blocks and gluing them end to end and creating 8 sets like this. You'll see here there are 3 blocks, but I ended up changing that, and I also made 4 sets of 6 blocks glued end to end. So I'm making a lantern here and realized I made assembling it harder than it needed to be. I thought it would be easiest to put the 4 sides together first, so I took 2 of the 3 block pieces, I didn't cut the 3rd block off just yet, and glued 1 to each end of the 6 block piece. When I went to put the sides together, I realized the 3 blocks was just too long, so that's when I got out my miter box and cut 1 block off of each end. This looks much better, and I can now glue the pieces together. There's going to be a square in the center, and the sections are not going to line up evenly. I glued 1 section to kind of the middle of the blocks for the section next to it. I hope that makes sense, but you'll see how it starts to come together. And I only glued the top together first, let that dry, and then glued the bottom. So I made this same lantern, but with the giant Jenga blocks from Five Below, and this time I glued the bottom together first, then added the sides, and flipped it over to add the top. And I think this way was a little easier to assemble in case you want to recreate this project. Back to the regular size blocks, I'm using one of these wood circles from Dollar Tree for the base of the lantern and filled in the hole with spackle, and then glued it down to the bottom of the lantern. At first I only used wood glue, but the blocks are not even, so I added a dab of hot glue as well. Then I stained the lantern with that same Valspar antiquing glaze, but I didn't love how that looked, so I ended up painting the blocks black and left the circle with the stain. And that's it for this one. I think it's such a cute lantern, and you can make this as small or as large as you want. I hope you enjoyed seeing your most loved projects from this year, and I'll see you in the next one.